One thing that Scott seems to never learn is that he won't be able to escape something just by chasing a new thing that crosses his path. And that is how the story pretty much starts. He's haunted by a bad breakup, so bad that the name of his ex is not even supposed to be brought up by any of his friends, as if that somehow would make her magically disappear. And instead of properly grieving the pain he had been caused, carelessly seeks comfort by entertaining a relationship that obviously is good for neither party. Some of his friends at least highlight this fact, that he's behaving absurdly by getting with a naive 17-year-old as a 22-year-old, but clearly he has not yet learned that this is inappropriate. Yes, she might be only allowed when the sun is up. They're not doing anything too intimate, and he's not breaking any laws. What still matters is that she's an innocent girl whose heart is being toyed with by a guy who hasn't even managed to see how his heart is feeling in regards to his past experience. She clings to him like her every next move is completely dependent on him, while he is starting to realize that he is really not up to being so responsible of her emotions, and idiotically tries to delay the inevitable. Scott is stuck, having no job or goals, playing in the band mostly just because he can, and he feels alone. At least, until someone makes an appearance in his desolation, someone he immediately asks to make out with. This dream leaves him in a daze, one that makes him even less responsive to the people around him, until one day this dream starts to seep into reality. Not able to trust his eyes, he sees the girl he dreamt of without being able to loosen the grip of his attention in the slightest. At Julie's party, he's able to make an acquaintance with this girl, thanks to Como, who knows everybody, and lets him know through Scott's highly accurate detective sketch that her name is Ramona Flowers, and everybody warns him that she's hardcore, which doesn't affect Scott in the slightest. Once he meets her, he uses one of his fun facts to sound interesting that he got up his sleeve, but completely falls flat with her, unable to reach her star-high appeal. So, instead of actually leaving her alone forever now, he stalks her. In other words, he becomes obsessed. I mean, he already was obsessed. So obsessed that he tells Wallace about her, who couldn't care less about someone romanticizing about a girl. But what he does care about is being a voice of conscience, and sleepily tells the inattentive Scott that he should break up with his fake high school girlfriend. Sleep is no match for Wallace's passion for gossip, and he lets Scott's sister know. She tells him the same thing, but Scott, being how he is, tries to change the topic. With Nice only getting more into Scott and band culture, he's only digging himself a deeper grave of shame. He of all people should know how much it sucks being cheated on, but he's too much of a coward. Still in the magical days, he enters the subspace and sees Ramona delivering the package he had ordered. He wakes up and receives her immediately, which to him is like they're opened up a new world, but to her is completely normal as she uses the subspace highways to travel quickly through the world, like it's an everyday thing for her. Perhaps this is how she manages to be able to live in a house by just being an Amazon deliverer? Anyway, so yes, Scott managed to hang out with Ramona, and they seem to really enjoy their time together, just walking in the snow and talking. It only gets more snowy, and Ramona says there is a door, to which they float to and enter to warm themselves up at her home. But Scott cannot have tea, so they end up warming up each other. At this point I want to say, Scott had still the chance to at least message Knives right before entering the door, but he now truly made his bet of cheating on Knives and not letting Ramona know he's dating someone, if him asking for a date was not already shitty enough. He even wants to take it further than this night with Ramona and invites her to the Battle of the Bands. She agrees and gives him her number with what Scott thinks are lots of kisses, and she skates away with her magical aura, able to melt the snow around her. She comes to the event and super awkwardly is witness to Knives giving her first kiss to Scott right in front of her. Scott continues being a coward and they end up playing their music, when suddenly they are interrupted by the grandiose entrance of a surprise fight to the death that Scott is challenged to. Apparently Matthew Patel let him know beforehand, but Scott had been a little monothematic lately. He tells him that he's part of the League of 7 Evil Exes, which Scott has to defeat, to get Ramona Flowers. Matthew Patel is the first of those, and Ramona tells Scott and the venue their history of fighting and his mystical powers. He and the scary looking hipster chicks shoot fireballs at Scott, actually incinerating Crash and the boys. And Scott comes out on top in his fight against Matthew Patel and the Sex Bob-Ombs as winners, as they're the only ones left. Ramona clarifies the situation with the 7 evil exes Scott has to defeat to date her, which so far simply makes him happy to hear that they are dating. Wallace again has to let him know that he seriously has to break up with Knives, but Scott plays a total victim here, claiming that it's hard. His inconvenience of telling the truth to an innocent girl, even if it might be painful, is something he delays just because it would make him feel bad. But he ends up breaking up with her, finally. But sadly right at the point when she ends up confessing her love to him. He feels bad about it on the ride home, but quickly cheers up because he's now free to pursue his new girl. Next up, Wallace's celebrity crush is filming his new movie at the castle nearby, to which he goes to. But first, Scott had Ramona over and he sings her a nice lovely little song and learns about some hard facts to swallow about bread. Scott is overall pretty nervous. A big reason why is because she changed her hair color without telling him. And when she tells him how his hair is shaggy, he's quickly sent into an emotional spiral, recalling his own evil ex he has not yet been able to escape, Envy Adams. Or as he knew her, Natalie. So he looks for ways to save the situation by meeting up with Wallace as planned. Although save it did not, because he's thus being introduced to a new member of the league, movie star, skater and owner of a skate company, Lucas Lee. Scott fights him and his stunt double team and is struggling quite a lot, but he manages to figure out Lucas' weakness and gets him to do a risky grind down a long set of stairs, which he gets convinced to do because there are girls watching. So he dies without Scott having to do any more fighting. He's starting to feel the struggle of his new pursuit, and Wallace motivates him to continue, mostly so that he can have more room for himself. Then, out of the blue, they get a call. It is his ex, Envy Adams. Still being vulnerable to her, he ends up telling her of his new girl even though he doesn't want to. Walking on his own, he's haunted by this moving cloud, but with a quick or rather accidental boop punch, stops his girl from whirring around him. This leaves him totally confused, and he calls up his sister at the telephone booth right at her workplace to get some sanity. Inside he comes upon Ramona, and shockingly, also upon Envy. She tells him she's jealous, and that he should come see her band play, with her boyfriend Todd Ingram as bass, the guy she cheated on Scott with. At the show, the sex bombs are also asked to open, because a gig is a gig is a gig, as Stefan the talent says. And Scott is unsure about it and asks Ramona. She gives him the responsible and grown-up answer. Knives sees and stalks the two and starts scheming a plan to get him back, dyeing her hair and getting together with young Neil. Out of a complete misunderstanding, she now has become the sworn enemy of Ramona. At the event, after only realizing right at the performance that Todd Ingram actually had been one of Ramona's evil exes all along, who she got with immediately, leaving Lucas right then and there, they get invited backstage. The situation escalates and Todd punches the highlights out of Knives' hair. And once Todd and Envy make fun of Toronto, Scott stands up to challenge Todd, who reveals to hold psychic powers. It turns out, Todd is vegan, so naturally, he has supernatural powers at his disposal, including advanced scientific knowledge. Scott and Todd end up having a bass battle, which still does not put Scott on an equal footing, and so he ends up figuring out other plans. Using reverse psychology, Scott gets Todd to drink half and half, which is a vegan violation. He had been overconfident in his supernatural ability to be able to read Scott's mind and fell for his trick. Busted by the vegan police for a third strike, he loses his powers and his cool hair, leaving Scott an opening to headbutt pulverize him into coins. As much as Envy is sad over losing her boyfriend, she expresses a greater kind of sadness after hearing Scott call her Natalie, like she's recalling some lost aspect of herself. Scott is getting tired of fighting, and with the mood real bad, Ramona's patience is also running low, as she leaves it up to Scott and how he's feeling to decide to continue to the next bar, but he also tries to leave it up to her. While she's the one genuinely asking, he's just being whiny. They're getting into a conversation about the relationship overall, also diving into Scott's dating history very briefly, which he embellishes to sound as crazy as what he's going through right now, as if this is what she would want to hear from him. Ramona continues being empathetic and tells him not to worry. At the bar, the blonde girl from earlier makes her appearance, which clicks in his head why Ramona kept correcting him saying ex-boyfriends to exes. Scott doesn't want to fight Roxy Richter because of girls being soft, and not in the can't kick ass type of way, but in the soft to the touch kind of way. So Ramona steps in to take care of it with her big hammer. He takes out of her handbag with a 5-pointed star that has quite a lot of room since she's a magical adept of subspace. After a bit of puppeteering because the rules of the league require Scott to defeat the evil ex, Scott learns of a literal weak spot Ramona tells him about, and wins the fight with Roxy by having her go through a petite mort. Ramona and him are in an even worse mood for the night, and he ends up making a rude and unnecessary comment. And he also gets the list he requests, and knows that next up are the Katyanagi twins. Scott is ready to play bass with a fighting spirit, and the band realizes that the event is actually an amp versus amp against the Katyanagi twins' electronic sound. Not only that, on the stage Scott realizes that Ramona is at the concert as well, talking to none other than the G-Man, who is the owner of the label the band wants to sign with, and also Ramona's final evil ex, Gideon Graves. You can overhear him sweet-talking her, saying stuff like, "I only did it because I love you." Already one knows this must be the salt of the earth type of person and not a total slimeball. They give it their all in their battle against the twins, fighting against the dragons and blowing them up with their roaring sound. This gives Scott a 1-up. This'll come in useful later. He goes for Ramona, gathering up all his courage to finally tell her what he feels, how much he's in lesbians with her, but to no avail. She's decided it would be better to break up, because she can't help herself around Gideon. It's almost like she's just unable to use her will to decide otherwise. The Sex Bob-ombs signed to Gideon's label, subbing in young Neil as the new bass player, and Scott is left alone with his love song. Wallace still wants Scott to move out and move in with Ramona, but Scott tells him of the bad news. And at first, Wallace sympathizes with Ramona's decision to stop dating Scott. Why wouldn't he? But then Gideon gives them a call, and upon overhearing them, Wallace tells Scott to end the slimy dude's pixel life. He gets ready, scheming his way into the impenetrable fortress guarded with high security passwords to beef it up with the League founder and final evil ex. Finally, Scott is able to say out loud the right word of how he feels for Ramona and gains a flaming sword with the power of love. He defeats all the guards, but the sword ends up not being powerful enough and shatters into pieces when hit against Gideon's sword. The feeling of love is not enough for him to overcome his past and defeat this tyrant who seeks power over others. Knives ends up jumping in and mistakenly targets Ramona as an evil perpetrator who she needs to defend Scott from. And after wrestling Gideon out of the way, Scott breaks up their fight, and what has been really going on comes to light, that he cheated on Knives, and that Ramona hadn't even been aware of this, effectively cheating on her as well. Out of nowhere, Gideon stabs Scott and kills him. With his ego facing total defeat, he falls into his isolated subspace. Ramona tells him about her and Gideon, and reveals that really, he's an evil manipulator, tapping into vulnerabilities and controlling her behavior. She lets him know that for him to really be able to do the right thing, he doesn't have to just follow his feeling for her, but fight for himself. He feels like he learned something, which would be great if he wasn't dead. Now, something he gained earlier comes in handy, and he uses the 1-up to try again. This time, after having had to face total failure, he's now ready to own up to his behavior, ranking up young Neil's confidence to be Neil and be the real member of the band, and apologizing to Kim for being an all-around wanker. Still there for his beef, Scott confronts Gideon, and right away he asks Scott if he is fighting for her. As if he would know that this is a sign of weakness Gideon can manipulate. But no, Scott has changed. He has now earned the power of self-respect and is able to exert a will of his own to achieve what he wants to achieve. He is able to overpower Gideon, and not only that, he also now lets Knives know that she doesn't have to fight Ramona. He lets her know what has been really going on, finally owning up to his behavior and no longer playing the victim. No longer haunted by the shadow of his past to continue to control him like that. This newfound self-knowledge breaks Ramona out of Gideon's control. G-Man takes out his secret weapon, a pixelated laser sword, which almost ends up being stronger than Scott's newfound control over his will. But thankfully, with the assistance of others, they are able to take out Gideon after turning him into the glitchy mess that he is. Picking up his broken glasses, through which his voice continues to haunt the world, he lets Scott know that he has now to defeat the final battle. He has to defeat himself. And they end up having a lot in common. After all, facing total failure, Scott already had learned what lies in his shadow. And well, there's no conflict to be had anymore between the two. Or the one. With Knives and Ramona waiting, Ramona slowly makes her way off, seeing how good of a team Scott and Knives make. Scott confronts her, and she feels like she's dragging people into too many dramas, and doesn't want to continue hurting people that way. Scott understands, but Knives thinks he should go for her. After having gone through all what he has, isn't that what he always wanted? So, he follows her advice, and asks if he could tag along with Ramona on her journey. Slightly teary-eyed, she is really glad to have this newly matured companion with her on the lonely journey that is life, wherever it would lead and for how long it might be for. And as such, after leaving the upside-down Triforce underworld of Gideon, they go from this limbo into another door, namely that of the five-pointed star. Aiming to go for a higher and new ideal, Scott had done the things to claim back his will and accountability, and succeeded to do so. But now, the real journey has yet to begin, that of entering his quest of reclaiming his soul. But that is how the story ends, with an endless horizon and a feeling of what the star goal could be like.